So we're going to move ahead quickly again because Lisa has got a tight rope around my neck with regard to we hit 10:15 and I may be hung. So I am on a mission to finish by 10:15. That there is a slide I think that will come up about virtual meetings. But if you have any, this kind of explains it, and we're going to just move on. If you have questions, you can put something in the chat, and we'll get to you. So far in our series, we've talked about lead in drinking water and nutrients in our water. Today, we're going to talk about PFAS, which stands for something that I am not going to attempt to say. It's PFAS, and I think that's the way everybody discusses it, talks about it. And the issue came to our attention, I think, when our former chairman, Darwin Boer of Michigan, while he was vice chairman, he brought this issue to the caucus, and it's been on everybody's radar screen since then. Today, we're very fortunate to have as our speaker another Michigander, and it's Liesl Eichler-Clark, Director of Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy for the state. Director Clark's biography is in the briefing book, and after giving us the PFAS 101, she will tell us about Michigan's response to the widespread contamination in their state. And I gotta believe, without question, there will be some lessons for all of us that we can take away from this discussion. So I'm not gonna say Miss Clark. Since I now know how to pronounce your first name, I'm going to say, Liesl, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ed. What a wonderful introduction. And, it's interesting. I have this challenge with my team all the time. Director Clark, no, please call me Liesl. We are all in this together. So I appreciate that. So thanks for inviting me to talk on this important topic. We were visiting a little bit before we started the call, and I know we're all getting a little zoomed out, but I do appreciate your time and attention, and I appreciate us breaking these up into smaller chunks so that we can have conversations that, would be a lot easier in a conference setting and if we had a chance to be around each other. But we'll make do in the meantime, and I'm very appreciative of you highlighting this. In particular, appreciate Lisa, John, and Jenny, who got me prepped and ready to present today. You've got a fantastic team. So also thanks to the Michigan State Legislature delegates who are participating today. They continue to show their commitment to protecting Michigan's environment and public health with regards to PFAS contamination all the time. And, we are in the midst of just finishing a budget, and I really am deeply appreciative to the legislators for supporting the work at Eagle. I'm, of course, especially grateful to Senator Kurt Vanderwall, who arranged this opportunity and has been a big friend to me and to the department. If you all don't know this about Senator Vanderwall, he is absolutely a true Great Lakes legislator, not only from his commitment to these issues, but also for the beautiful district that he represents, which is truly one of my favorite places on this beautiful earth. So it runs from Ludington to the tip of the Leelanau Peninsula and east. If you have not visited the beautiful Sleeping Bear Dunes, the fantastic wineries, the small little hamlets, Leland and Northport and others, you really should. And in honor of Senator Vanderwall, I did wear my necklace from his district today. So very much appreciative of his partnership and interest in highlighting this issue and supporting the work of our department. And again, if you have not been to this part of Michigan, you really have to. So let's talk a little bit about something that's less fun, but very important when it comes to the work that we do to protect public health and the environment, PFAS. So if you go ahead and advance the slide for me, thank you. Michigan has 148 documented sites where we have groundwater contamination that exceeds our cleanup criteria. So these sites span the gamut from military installations to landfills, industrial sites, and airports. If you take a look at a national map of PFAS hotspots, it'll light up like a Christmas tree. And as I've had conversations with my colleagues around the country, they say, well, you know, Michigan, you have a lot of PFAS. And I say, no, 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 you have a lot of PFAS too. You just don't know because you're not looking yet. Everywhere around the country where people have looked, they have found it. It doesn't mean that we're more contaminated. It just means that we have a comprehensive and aggressive approach. We test for water samples at contaminated sites for PFAS. We proactively investigate active and former facilities that are suspected or known PFAS site sources. And we have tested community water supplies throughout our state. As you can see by the map here, we've found PFAS in every part of our state and are currently investigating many of the thousands more potential sites. So let's talk a minute about what is PFAS. So per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, that was my best attempt at PFAS. They're a class of man-made chemicals, and they have one of the strongest bonds in chemistry. It's the carbon-fluorine bond, and that is what makes them persistent and pervasive and bioaccumulative. There are more than 5,000 known PFAS compounds. They repel oil, water, fat, and grease, which are, you know, useful attributes, right? So they act as detergents, wetting agents, emulsifiers, and foaming agents. You can see why this class of chemicals was widely used. So they have applications across many industries. And you'll see on the next slide, from food packaging to apparel, certainly in aeronautics, energy, and electronics, just to name a few. So why are we concerned? We're concerned because some of them bioaccumulate, which means they build up in us as well as in other species. Some PFAS may affect health. So observed health effects from oral exposure, primarily with PFOA and PFOS, so PFOA and PFOS, include lower birth weight, immune system effects, liver and thyroid damage, and testicular cancer. So why is this one different? We were talking a little bit before we got started. What makes PFAS different? Why is this challenge new? So they are widespread because of the use that we mentioned earlier, because they are used in many different ways and they are found everywhere. This persistent part is really important because they don't break down easily. They're hard to get rid of, and this is a really critical point in the way that we look at PFAS. You know, any number of chemicals that we've had challenges with in the past, from dioxins to PBBs to PCBs. So why is PFAS different? It's because it's harder to break them down. As a result, they migrate in our waste and our water systems, and then they eventually find their way into our drinking water, aquifers, and surface water. And this is why it's so important. And arguably, this is one of the things that I, frankly, am most proud of about our state, is the way that we all feel passionately connected, not only to our Great Lakes, but also to our inland water systems. And I would like to mention Minnesota. You're the land of 10,000 lakes, but we have 11,000. Not that I'm competitive or anything. We care about our water in Michigan. And so that's part of the reason and others care about their water too. Don't mean to disparage, but there is a real passion around what is in our water, which is one of the reasons why people care so much about this. We're learning more now about how it also moves in air and other media. In fact, South Carolina has been leading on some of that research. Michigan's leading a multi-state work group to evaluate PFAS air emissions. Now, because we can't sequester or destroy the PFAS, they do move through the ecosystem, as you can see here in this slide. So an example is at the landfill. So consumer products and other industrial waste that gets disposed at the landfill will release PFAS into the leachate, or the water that comes out of the landfill. Then that gets managed at a wastewater treatment plant. But if the treatment plant's not designed to treat it, the PFAS will pass through to the surface water and then impacting the drinking water potentially, and fish, where people would also absorb it through fishing. So these PFAS can accumulate in the wastewater treatment sludge that's applied to agricultural fields as biosolids, impacting soil, groundwater, surface water runoff, and possibly crops. Our challenge is to understand where PFAS exists, how it moves about, and how to break these cycles. And to do all of this, we must be led by science. So Michigan has responded with a multi-agency action team called MPART, the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team. The statewide scope and public health threat for PFAS led to the creation of the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team to ensure efficient and effective response. So MPART's an advisory body. They're charged with coordinating actions of state departments responsible for environmental and natural resources protection, agriculture, public health, military installations, fire departments, and commercial airports. So the MPART structure has allowed us to build a more effective means of communication across state government. At one point in time, the executive MPART was actually in the governor's office and existed there so that all the state departments would report up. Now that person exists within Eagle. I think there are a lot of good ways to do it. But as it can be true in Michigan from time to time, and I suspect this is true in other states, making sure that we have effective means to communicate across state government can be a challenge. And we have found success, not that it is perfect by any means, but we found a lot of success with the MPART structure. When it comes to Eagle, Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, in our department alone, it has involved tens of thousands of hours in tireless leadership from members of our team across our entire 9 divisions, from water to drinking water to waste and remediation. It's been a massive and taxing undertaking across the state of Michigan and within our agency. I've been reflecting a lot on this lately because we've just wrapped up a budget season and we're getting into another budget season. And as is the case, often there are new and more challenges put on the plate and nothing comes off the plate from a state government perspective. And so figuring out how to make sure that we're balancing that workload and being as effective and efficient as possible while focusing our time on priorities, it's a really, really tall order. So MPART, though, is responsible for coordinating with local and federal agencies as well as stakeholders to promote consistency, share information, and leverage resources. MPART is really the reason why we've been so successful at rapid identification and reducing exposures. I want to spend a minute on communicating with locals. This has been a really critical part of MPART. And again, we're not always perfect by any means, but there's been a lot of structure created within MPART that has allowed us to do this better. The unknown is scary. PFAS is scary, and not really understanding to what extent it impacts us is scary. We're still learning. We're learning about PFAS and trying to ground all of our work in science. With scientists, sometimes they can struggle to be honest about what we don't know and to be ready to talk, even though we don't have all the answers. So I continue to impress upon my team, transparency is key. Even if we don't know everything, we need to communicate what we know, and we need to communicate what we don't know. And when our team has worked really directly with locals and been very honest and had very open conversation, we've been the most successful. So this MPART structure has enabled us to be comprehensive, data-driven, and use a science-based approach. So the MPART impact just in fiscal year 2020 numbers, our team put these numbers together, and it really knocked me over because it's amazing the amount of work that has happened on top of the other challenges that we've been dealing with in Michigan. So we've been on a proactive hunt. We've been testing water contaminated sites. We've been proactively investigating known sources. We've been sampling at wastewater sites. We've been sampling at community drinking water sites. And then we work backwards to figure out where's the source of the PFAS. And this has actually been a really important part of this program, has been partnering with industry. So instead, again, back to that kind of water cycle discussion and how everything moves, instead of trying to clear it out at the back end, so when it gets to a drinking water or wastewater system, our team has been working closely with industry to move up the chain. So it's the industrial pretreatment program. We've been working with platers and other types of industrial users of PFAS and helping them identify what they're discharging and then creating opportunities to help them get it out of their facility. In so many cases, when it's entering the ecosystem, whoever's putting it in, they don't want to be doing that, right? So once they understand the impact, they're very interested in coming up with a better way. And so our team has been working there as well. That's been a very successful aspect to the program, is to work closely with industry. So in this year alone, we've collected 568 water samples from lakes and streams, 514 for fish to look at PFAS. We have fish advisories in many parts of the state, or I should say in some parts of the states, because of PFAS in water. We've monitored 99 public water systems. We've sampled close to 1,000 residential wells and resampled close to 1,500 residential wells, provided filters and replacement cartridges across the state. And importantly, we've implemented an initiative at 96 municipal wastewater treatment sites to identify industrial sources of PFAS. And then a big initiative that has gotten a lot of press has been, we've collected the air fighting foam, the aqueous firefighting foam, the foam that's used to fight fires, again, a lot when it comes to airports and military facilities. We've collected that foam and are working to make sure that it's not getting used or discharged in an inappropriate way and adding to our challenges. So from a regulatory perspective, from a policy perspective, there's also been a lot of action on the maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, in Michigan for PFAS in 2020. So we promulgated 7 drinking water standards for PFAS, and they navigated through the state rulemaking process, very soundly rooted in science. So our testing demonstrated that we needed these drinking water standards because it helps the systems operationalize that monitoring work that they need to do to protect the residents that then receive that drinking water. Evidence of adverse health impacts from PFAS also continued to mount. So our science advisors indicated that the US EPA's lifetime advisory level of 70 parts per trillion for 2 PFASs in drinking water was not low enough to protect public health. And so we embarked upon considering additional compounds. Governor Whitmer directed MPART to form a science advisory work group last year to recommend health-based values for PFAS as the foundation to rulemaking. So based on that work group's recommendation, EGLE then moved 7 new MCLs through the process, and during the pandemic, it into effect this year. And I should say too, there was a real push to do more than that and to group the chemicals differently. But we wanted to make sure that what we did was really rooted in science. And so EGLE's approach was based on what that science advisory work group said. So really it's funding and policies that make this all this work possible. So of course we have to have a very close relationship with our state legislature and really appreciate their leadership and work on PFAS. They appropriated $70 million to PFAS work since 2018. And the majority of that funding was actually through the state's general fund. While there haven't been a lot of significant policy changes at this point, there will be things I suspect we'll be working on together in the future. And there are tools right now that we've worked to use creatively. For example, in Michigan, one of our MCLs, not to be confused with the maximum contaminant level, is the Michigan compiled law. So we've got 2 MCLs for you. So on the statute side, Part 201 allows EGLE to establish criteria for contaminants, which we've done for PFAS, allowing us to compel cleanup of groundwater. Part 31 allows EGLE to set water quality standards. And so that is a tool that we use to assess surface water impacts around the Wurtsmith Air Force Base, one of the places where we saw historical use of PFAS, again, really accumulate and have some real challenges in that community. That was a critical tool for that wastewater program that I mentioned before. And then as I also talked about, we used that Safe Drinking Water Act to establish the maximum contaminant levels for 7 PFAS compounds. So throughout all of this, Michigan's also been working with our partners across state government. So we've been operating in a way where we've been trying to understand the science and trying to understand where things are going, and differently than, for example, lead or copper or some of the other contaminants where there are clear criteria set by the federal government. That doesn't exist in this case. And so we've worked closely with national groups like ECOS, which is the Environmental Council in the states. All the state directors sit there, as well as across state lines with our colleagues in other Great Lakes states. We visited Minnesota a couple of years ago. Wisconsin came to visit us a little bit over a year ago. And we've been bringing multiple agencies together in order to have these discussions so that we learn from our partners and our partners can learn from us. We work closely with Ohio as they were starting to develop their public water surveillance system. And then the Great Lakes St. Lawrence governors and premiers passed a resolution last year in Milwaukee to create the Great Lakes PFAS Task Force. So a similar approach to MPART, but combining across the Great Lakes states. That has been critical because there are things that are being seen in other states that we haven't seen yet in Michigan. And there are things we can offer from Michigan's perspective about how we dealt with something to try to shorten the response time for another state. So I hope that this has been a helpful overview. I do really appreciate GLLC asking me to come and talk, not only about Eagle, but also about MPART and the Michigan story. And I, again, really appreciate Senator Vanderwall for thinking of us and for knowing that we had a story to share and for wanting to do that. We couldn't do this important work to protect Michigan's environment and public health without strong collaboration and strong support in so many different sectors, and particularly in the legislature. So I very much appreciate that. I would be happy to take some questions, and I'll do the best that I can. I am not the engineer or the scientist on this one, but I'll translate to the best of my ability. And we've shared Steve's information on this slide, Steve Sliver, who is our fantastic MPART lead, who can answer any possible question. So with that, thanks for your attention. I know this is always an unusual environment, but I hope that this has furthered the understanding, and I'm sure there's lots of questions.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the presentation, and I'm sure everyone does. I guess a couple of quick things, and it's because of my lack of knowledge at this point in time. If it's a significant issue, and if we look at a state, like you say, Michigan just lights up, and I'm sure Indiana would also. And if it's an issue, how do you manage the public's response or reaction to this? Yeah, I don't know why you can't see me here. Oh, there you can see me. I apologize. And then what, do you have a figure on what to date the cost has been to Michigan to address the problem?
Yeah, so those are great questions, Ed. And I continue to think that communication is critical to everything that we do, but super critical here in the PFAS area. We don't have a solid, complete understanding. We have to let the science that we do have guide us, and we have to stay rooted in that. My experience, people, tend to be extra nervous when there's things that they don't know. And so the best way I think we can handle that is to, again, really focus on being transparent and sharing what we know when we know it, but also being able to have that conversation and say, we don't know everything right now. This is where the science is taking us, but we don't have all the answers, and we have to be honest about that. I think honest and regular communication is really the best path forward. So we have spent $80 million just in recent appropriations. That is directed at PFAS, so it's been a variety of things that funding is supported. One of the things to point out that funding is supported is additional lab equipment so that we can handle the additional level of testing that's necessary. There are a couple of different testing methods, and so that has been, kind of one of the things that the lab folks work out. There's a testing method that's different for blood versus different for drinking water, but making sure that we're getting the best information as possible is necessary. One of the tricks here too is we're talking in a lot of scenarios about a very small amount of chemical that has a fairly big impact. When you talk about parts per trillion, I didn't have the slide in here, but it's, a very small drop in multiple Olympic-sized swimming pools. But that's part of the reason that we're having this discussion, is because that tiny drop has such an impact, because it is persistent, pervasive, and bioaccumulative. So, it's something that we're all gonna be working on for a while, I suspect.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, I don't know if you have any questions from anyone.
We have a question from Representative Robin Gable. She asks, are PFAS contaminants of emerging concern? So that designation, does that apply?
It does. There has also been a bit of a discussion about, do we call them emerging concern when we know that they've been used for decades? And so there are some that also talk about it in terms of kind of legacy concerns. So you may hear it referred to in both ways.
And what's the official name of PFAS?
Per and polyfluoral alkali substances.
Okay.
So, and that refers to that carbon-fluorine bond that is very strong. And so the scientists, the chemists will tell you it's very hard to break that bond and to, separate it so that you can then do disposal. And again, that persistent pervasive is part of the reason we're having this discussion. So like a dioxane, again, Liesel's not the scientist, so anybody on here, I'm sure there's scientists who know way more about this, but in my shorthand version, you think about it from a dioxane perspective, and I know we hear about the concerns with dioxane. However, exposed to UV light, we can break dioxane down and then dispose of it and get it out of that system. PFAS, we don't right now have great solutions as to how to get it out of the system.
Okay, we did a study here in Illinois, our university, looking at wastewater water treatment plants and the kind of emerging contaminants of emerging concern, and I don't see that on the list of things they found. I mean, they found a lot of drugs, pharmaceutical drugs.
Sure.
But I'm not sure if we found.
I'd be surprised if they didn't. I'd be really surprised
if they did not. Yeah,
I'd be very surprised if they didn't find PFAS. I mean, again, it might not have been PFAS. They may have found, some of the other. It's a class of 5,000 chemicals. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'll find out which of these may have been that. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Great, and I see that MPP French has her hand raised. So go ahead and unmute your line. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I will admit that I may not have a lot of background on this, so I value your input, but I do have a couple of notes here. So in Ontario, we're part of an agreement with Canada, Ontario, and Ontario itself has certain obligations under what's known as the COA, the Canada-Ontario Agreement on Great Lakes Water Quality and Ecosystem Health. One of our obligations is under that is about eating fish and the health of Ontarians and whatnot. So I know that they have kind of an Eating Ontario Fish guide that is updated that considers what we have designated as chemical of concern when we're talking about PFOA and PFAS. Is there something that can be shared, kind of best practices, as that agreement is actually being, I won't say renegotiated, but it was set to expire in 2019, and it's being developed now for 2020. So just as something to kind of share with the ministry folks as they're putting that together. But my other comment was, when you had listed, and I know it wasn't a comprehensive list, but when you had listed some of the health challenges, one thing I didn't hear was actually what is considered the measure by Canada in their guidelines for Canadian drinking water quality. When they consider PFAS, they're basing I won't say allowable limits, the maximum limits or whatnot, based on is there another measure, or is that a sufficient measure, is looking at that one part of its effects and making recommendations? Because I'm looking at like milligrams per liter, and I can't do the quick math on, you know, parts per trillion, so I don't know what these numbers are comparatively. But is that a halfway decent measure, or again, is there somewhere to kind of some way to share?
So those are both excellent questions. We would love to be in conversation about fish advisories. How do we set that metric, and then how do we communicate that? So be glad to talk as you're thinking through the COA. And then our science advisory work group came up with, you know, how do we look? They looked at all the different studies to understand what was the important measure. So I'm happy to get you in touch with toxicologists and to get your scientists in touch with folks so they can have a apples to apples conversation about, you know, what is the right metric, you know, and what should we be using. And we'd love to learn, you know, from how you're looking at it as well. So let's, we can talk offline. I can connect you with Steve, and then we can get, you know, kind of the right scientists to talk to each other so that we don't have to do milliliters. Yeah.
And I know that the folks at the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, I think this falls under them. I'm not exactly sure, so it'll take me a bit to connect the appropriate folks, but I'd be glad to do that work. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to be in touch. That's been honestly the connections that we've had with other jurisdictions, other science efforts, other regulatory groups. Like, that's been so productive for us in moving this forward. So we'd love to be in touch.
Great. We have another question. It's from M&A Belanger, and he's asking, you know, what about the materials that will replace PFAS in the commercial products and the firefighting foams that contain the PFAS? I think the question is getting at, are those chemicals known to be safer? You know, are they being tested, or is this maybe a problem that might come down in the future?
Mostly about the Gen X, that is different carbon structure that's replacing, I believe, PFAS. So that was my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And making sure that we've got the appropriate levels of testing before some of these chemicals go into place is certainly a regular conversation in the states, across not only the Great Lakes states, but across all the US. And making sure that, you know, as I mentioned, there's a reason that we were using these chemicals and that we still are using these chemicals. And in fact, you know, some of these chemicals are still in regular industry circulation even today. There's PFAS in a lot of dental floss. There's PFAS in the materials like the Scotch Guard and the Teflon and the things, you know, the Gore-Tex, like the things that repel, right? So it is a really important question to say, what are we replacing it with? And do we understand the human health impact and environment impact of those chemicals as well? And again, sad to say, I'm not the scientist to be able to go into great detail on that, but you know, we share that concern and would be happy to kind of continue a dialogue about what do those chemicals look like, and do we feel confident about the level of safety for our residents as well as our environment.
All right. And Lisa, I do have another question. Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my other question is about the treatment of leachate that contains PFAS. Here in Quebec, we're very close to one of the largest landfill, which is called Coventry. It's in Vermont, and the treatment of the leachate traditionally goes through the municipal water treatment, where I believe does not treat the PFAS and the Gen X very well. So do you have any like best practice to treat leachate instead of sending that through a municipality, and after that the water that was treated, traditionally what they do, they dilute that before hitting the water treatment, and after that it goes in the lake, where that lake provides water for hundreds of thousands of citizens. And so I was curious about best practice for water treatment also, but also online real-time monitoring of PFAS in order to be proactive instead of reactive?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to try to hit on a few points. The first is one of the ways Michigan was successful. And again, we're not perfect. We haven't solved all these problems by any means, but things that I am proud of is this industrial pretreatment program where we worked with industry to figure out how PFAS was first entering the system and then help those facilities get it out of their discharge. So that's really a first step because you got to go as far up as possible in the chain. And again, that's part of the reason we've collected the AFFF, the firefighting foam as well. Now, then the question becomes, you're still going to get sources of PFAS in your landfills because you're still going to have it from consumer products, other types of, waste disposed. And so you're going to get it in the leachate. So first you try to reduce as much as possible, right? So let's shrink the amount of PFAS that we're using to the best of our ability. Then you have to get it out of the leachate. And so what we've done on the drinking water side in certain areas of the state is we've used granular activated carbon. So the GAC has proven to be effective in drinking water systems to removing PFAS, PFOA, PFAS to the levels that, at the moment science tells us we need to get under. So the GAC has been, and GAC runs, a few $1 million and has to be replaced regularly. Like there's additional steps that are necessary too, just like, any other type of system. The other piece that I think is really important here is the very first step Michigan took, which was testing public water supplies. So when I talk about this, it feels very intimidating because it's a big problem. And frankly, it's only one of the very large problems that we deal with at Eagle. And so we've got to triage. We do not have infinite people. We do not have infinite dollars. So we have to triage. And so where we start is public health impact. And so we know that a lot of the connections to PFAS are from ingestion. And so we're not seeing as much dermatological, like if people come into surface water contact, we're not seeing it in the same way there. So we know we have to start with drinking water. So we tested all of the public water supplies to understand what number they're at. And then we go back and we retest them on an interval. This is why the MCLs were important, is because the MCLs, the maximum contaminant levels under our Safe Drinking Water Act, put into place requirements that the public water systems need to do. And of course, we communicated with them all along. They knew this was coming. And they want to be able to say to their residents that they should not be concerned about the safety of the water that they're drinking. Like they want that, right? This is what we all want. And so how do we use the system? And again, triage, because we don't have infinite dollars and people, and figure out where are we going to get the biggest bang for the buck in our response. So I hope that's helpful. It's a pretty big question. I tried to.
Thank you very much.
Lisa, we have time for maybe one more question if you have any there.
We have a couple, and I think we seem to be doing pretty well on time. So I'm going to ask one. You may have just answered this, Liesl. It's from Senator Linda Holmes from Illinois. She asked, how did Michigan start testing? And I don't know if she is referring to the, well, Senator, if you want to speak up, go ahead.
I do, because I guess what my concern is obviously all of us, the lead issue is huge. We know there isn't a safe level of lead in water. Is there a safe level of this in our water? And I guess what I'm curious about, I don't even know if Illinois is testing this. So how do we get going? I mean, that map you showed of Michigan where you have all these sites, I don't know, does Illinois even have anything like that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I can't speak to the depth of what Illinois has done at this point. I will say you start testing, you're going to find it. And we have similar industrial heritages, which are important. Our economy is important. But, because we have similar heritage, you're going to find it when you're testing for it. Again, we triage, right? So where do you start? Where do you direct your time and energy? I mean, I would start like Ohio did, start with drinking water systems. And, how it came across for us is we were out and about in Southwest Michigan around a particular manufacturing facility. you know, in a community where the numbers were just off the charts, and then tracked it, you know, moved rapidly to get everybody there on supplemental drinking water immediately, and then, you know, try to triage the area and figure out, is it in the drinking water system? How's it getting to the drinking water system? How do we deal with it? Do we deal with it at the drinking water system site? Do we deal with it by putting people on supplemental water, which, you know, you really want to avoid that at all possible, because, you know, the plastic is no joke, and the movement of the water is no joke, and the cost of the water is no, so you try to avoid that. Can you deal with it with whole house filters? Can you deal with it with filters on site? You know, there are a lot of steps and a lot of things to think about, but, you know, we certainly are happy to share our experience and how we thought about it. And again, we weren't perfect. We were definitely not perfect in our process, and we can always learn from, you know, what others are doing as well.
Hey, Tim.
Representative, I was going to say Representative Tim Butler from Illinois looks like he wants to add to this.
Yeah, so Senator Holmes, just IEPA, Illinois EPA announced a couple weeks ago, Director Kim announced that we're going to test all 1,700 plus community water systems in Illinois for PFAS over the next year plus or so. So I think that'll help establish the baseline, at least with, you know, the drinking systems where we're at on it, and then I think we'll see where we'll go from there once the results are in on that, I guess. Got
to be data driven and rooted in science.
Yep.
Okay.
And then Senator, I'm sorry, we have one hand raised, and I would like to go to Senator Nikki Antonio, and then we'll wrap it up. And if others have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll track down answers.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation. My question is, as you were talking about finding out that charcoal is a possible way to filter out these chemicals and these elements, the question always comes up, especially I live right on the lake in Northeast Ohio, so we're always concerned about water quality. But what happens to those elements when they are filtered out? How are they being disposed of? And it sounds like they don't, if it's impossible to break them down, then where are they going? What's the disposal look like? And so that's my sort of micro question. And then my macro question is, how do we improve the communication and the results and the information, the data between all of our states toward specifically dealing with these elements? So thanks.
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. And our solid waste disposal team has been working with those across the Great Lakes region and frankly across the country to have this conversation. You have absolutely hit the nail on the head. So the trick becomes, you use your granular activated carbon, you get it out of your leachate, you get it out of your drinking water system, you collect your AFFF, then what? What do you do with that? Do you, deep well inject it? Do you, so this is absolutely a concern. So how do you handle that? How do you use it so that, how do you take care of it so it doesn't get back into the system? And so this is definitely something that our solid waste experts have been working on, and we can follow up with you, and they're going to do a better job than I am. I know that with our AFFF, we have 37,000 gallons of it that we are working with a waste disposal provider. And my last understanding of the way they were handling it is really rudimentary. So again, apologize because I'm not the scientist, but my understanding is they were largely going to put it out, spread it thinly out in the sun to let it like completely dry and then deal with the disposal from there. So I don't know, this stuff is really tough, and we've got to be rooted in science in order to kind of move the steps forward. There's lots of innovation that's necessary here. I mean, that's another exciting thing as you look at what our universities and research labs have been doing across the Great Lakes region as well as across the US, trying to figure out what's an innovative way to handle this. And that's a huge opportunity as well. You had another question, and it was, how do we communicate better? I would say the fact that you're having this conversation is a fantastic starting point, right? And there's a lot of work already being done in all of our states. And we're united and linked up through the environmental agencies. So getting connected across the state legislators, getting across, connected, you know, in many different ways helps us better handle it. And, you know, we continue to learn in Michigan when we see the progress made in other places. You know, Wisconsin was dealing with foam coming up in people's basements, and we hadn't seen that one yet in Michigan. So we were super happy that there was something new happening somewhere else. Not that we were happy it was happening, but just that it was one that, you know, we hadn't tackled yet. So we're going to continue to see these challenges, but, you know, with innovative solutions and with people that are ready to put their shoulders to the wheel, we can make a difference. We have to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for the very enlightening and I think thought-provoking discussion of PFAS. And if everyone would please join me in thanking her, and I don't know how we do it, but thumbs up or something, but fantastic presentation. And it's something we certainly need to follow as a caucus, since safe, clean, and affordable drinking water is one of our key goals. So again, thank you very much. And we'll now turn to the, well, I think one other thing I should mention, and it's in light of the discussion and the interest here, I'm glad to be able to say that the caucus will be continuing to examine the problem later in the year. Lisa has already been working with Director Clark and others to take a deeper dive into this issue. And we're going to have a presentation coming on later on this year, and it will be after November 3rd, so it will be beyond the election. And but take a look again at the options for treating our water supply so it's safe, it's contaminant free, what the risks are, and how we speak to our constituents. All points that were raised today in the discussion, but we're going to take a deeper dive into them. And it'll be 2 sessions, and Lisa will share the agenda somewhere down the road, and it'll be for a limited number. I mean, we have to keep the number limited, so when the time comes, make sure you put your reservation in so that we can continue. Again, this is a significant problem that I don't know about anybody else, but certainly I am hearing a lot about this for at least as far as the deep dive here that I was aware of. And it's certainly an issue that we need to be concerned about. So one last time, Director Clark, thank you for being with us today in your presentation. And we're going to now quickly move to the business session, and that's talk about the legislation that has gone on in the last couple of years dealing with water issues. And we're going to hear from each of the states with regard to significant things that might have or is going on in your state. So we're going to take it in alphabetical order, and Representative Gable and Senator Rest will get a pass as we'll hear from the members of the executive committee, and I will be taking Senator Niemeyer's spot as we go through the list. So if you could keep your remarks to a maximum of 3 minutes, it would be greatly appreciated. So with that, let's get started. Senator Fine for Illinois. Senator Fine. Robin, we were going to exempt you from making any comments, so I'm going to unexempt you, or
I'm not really prepared, Ed. I don't know.
We did have Senator Fine. Maybe she will be back. I don't see her in the list now, but she was on earlier.
Let's go to another state, Ed, and I'll see what she's up to.
Okay, now it's jumped to me very quickly, and I'm not, no, I am prepared to say a couple of things. What we've done over the last 2 years, and I think most significantly, and we have been working on infrastructure, and in the state of Indiana, we've finally identified it as best we can a $2.3 billion issue that we were dealing with, and we passed legislation that will hopefully on a continuing basis take $20 million per year and put it into an infrastructure assistance fund. The money will go to the Indiana Finance Authority, who has just a remarkable track record of being able to turn pennies into many, many dollars through association with the federal government. So this will be money that will be available to locals to help them with low interest, very low interest loans to go about the business of updating their infrastructure. So it's a long term, or we're looking at hopefully at $2 billion, but you know, it always depends on the economic picture and what's going on in the state. But I feel very, very confident that that will go on. We have over the last 2 years a great number of lead issued bills dealing with various things, and we did pass last year one dealing specifically with items in East Chicago that I see Representative Harris is on here. He has played a large part in getting that done. I think the last thing, in the interest of time, and in 2019, the governor issued a proclamation declaring September 7th as Great Lakes St. Lawrence Appreciation Day. And I asked him to do it again here, and he's done it. We have for the second year in a row, the governor has proclaimed September 7th to be a Great Lakes St. Lawrence Appreciation Day. So with that, I'll turn things over to Senator Vanderwall.
Laura Fine's getting back on the call, so.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Hi,
I think
I'm back.
Oh, okay.
Hi there. Yeah, so the report from Illinois right now is we are looking at water pollutants like polystyrene and what is getting into our water supply and what we can do to protect it. We have a whole series of bills that were filed last year on plastics and bans, especially styrofoam and single-use plastics. And that's a little bit about what we've been focusing on and what we hope to move forward with, in addition to looking at PAHs and banning coal tar in the state of Illinois.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe Tim, does Tim have anything to add, Tim or Linda?
You know, I think one of the things that that we did pass this past year was our coal ash bill, which was a pretty big piece of legislation in Illinois. And I think Laura's right. There's a wide variety of legislation that's been out there for microplastics and things like that, and a lot of discussions going on right now. I don't know if any of us on here are in the working group, but for looking at the next phase of energy legislation in Illinois, following up on our Future Energy Jobs Act from a couple of years ago and looking to expand renewables in Illinois. So we'll see where that goes in maybe the fall veto session in the spring. So.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Senator Vanderwall. You're muted.
Always got to unmute. You know,
Okay.
That's just the typical. How many thousands of Zoom meetings have we done, and we still forget to unmute? I'm gonna have to be honest with you guys. I left my report notes sitting on my desk in Lansing, and that is not a good situation right now since I'm in Ludington, Michigan. So I've just he's gonna email them to me. So if you could skedaddle to if there's somebody else, then I'll come back in just a second. That's my fault. I even sat them through there, and you know how it goes.
Okay, Kurt, we will loop back to you at some point.
Thank you.
Minnesota Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Senator Charbonneau. So in May, Minnesota became the first state to ban TCE, trichloroethylene. One of our companies was emitting this, and a community organized to ban it. So that's the big news from Minnesota. But I think we have Ann Claflin, I think, is here. She might want to talk about what we've done on PFAS as well, if she's available.
Hi, yes, I am available. We were doing a lot of work on PFAS this past session. We've not gotten as much through our legislature as I would have liked to see. I was working on a bill to ban PFAS from food and beverage packaging because, as we heard, it ends up in the leachate from our landfills, and it's also coming out of the compost sites, and we're having problems with the compost then being unusable, and the compost sites actually being toxic waste sites. We have been working on developing a plan in the East Metro part of our state where we're affected by the groundwater contamination by PFAS from 3M. And the Pollution Control Agency and Department of Natural Resources just recently released their plan of three different options to treat the public water supply. And those are open for public comment right now. And we should have a final recommendation on how the community should address the water supply issue by the end of the year or early next year. And the Pollution Control Agency is continuing to work on identifying more locations throughout the metro area and across our state because, again, as we heard, everywhere you look for this stuff, you find it. And more wells are being closed across our state. Diluting the contaminated water will only get us so far. We have got to look at how to get this out of our environment in the first place. So we are working a lot on how to address this at a lot of different levels. And I'm really glad that it's coming to the attention of a lot of other states, and I hope we can work together on this. Because I've been following the science, and scientists are recommending that we ban and control all of these PFAS chemicals just as a class instead of attacking them one by one, because they are engineered and we know that they are all dangerous at some level. So instead of trying to tackle these individually, if we are all working on this issue as a region, I think we can take a much stronger protective approach and really get these chemicals managed in a way that protects human health. Thanks for talking about this today.
Thanks, Representative Claflin. We're really lucky to have Ann Claflin at Minnesota. She's our representative scientist. I appreciate that. There is also a resolution that the Great Lakes Commission introduced on PFAS, and we're going to be introducing a similar resolution on PFAS, which you'll see at our next meeting. So thank you, Senator Charbonneau.
Thank you very much. Ohio, Representative Sheehy. Representative Sheehy, I saw you on here earlier.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. With respect to PFAS, initially a big concern was we have a big Air Force base down at Wright-Patterson near Dayton, and since that was concerned, there was some legislation introduced to prohibit Class B firefighting foam containing PFAS. The Air Force, I think, has come forward and voluntarily agreed not to or to use a different a form of a fire retardant, and but there's, as far as I know, no specific laws. But there was a great presentation from the Michigan representative, or EPA, the Michigan Eagle. I learned a lot, and we'll certainly continue to pursue where those chemicals are found throughout the state. With respect to lead, Representative Russo and Representative Greenspan, that's a bipartisan legislation, introduced a bill to establish lead service line replacement programs in Ohio, and the legislation will create a specific office for that within the Ohio EPA to coordinate the program. And specifically, the bill will require an inventory of all service lines, including private side services, requiring all public water systems to fully replace lead service lines within the next 20 years, banning partial lead service line replacements, enabling public water systems to develop and implement programs that reduce barriers to fully replacing lead lines, providing funding for lead services line replacement programs by way of grants, encouraging public water systems to create programs that provide financial assistance to low-income customers to replace their part of their lead service lines, and allowing customers to pay the remaining cost for private lead lines replacements through their water bill upfront or upfront. And then, of course, shoreline erosion is an immediate concern right now. And as I think we reported previously, the H2O program, we have 1 million acres of involuntary nutrient management applications, 185 lead service lines to be replaced, 60,000 acres of watershed filtered by wetlands projects, and 3,000 miles of additional watershed to be monitored for nutrient pollution and other pollutants. And I see that Representative Ken Smith is on here, and he might want to add a few words to this. But thank you for the opportunity, and I learned a lot this morning. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much. We're now going to move to Ontario and MPP French.
Hi again, folks. It's nice to see everyone. And I had made some comments, of course, earlier about PFAS, and it's interesting because our research folks through the Legislative Assembly had prepared some notes for me, and as I read about PFAS, I see that the majority of the notes and information on that come from Michigan. So thank you, Michigan. It would seem that we all are in need of doing the work. What I had mentioned though earlier about that Canada-Ontario agreement. So provinces have their own agreements with the federal government, of course, and there doesn't seem to be much in the way of specifics. As I had mentioned, that it focuses on reducing exposure of communities to consumption of fish. And so anyway, that's a piece. I am looking forward to kind of taking that back and being useful. One of the things that was interesting is in Ontario, we have regulations that, sort of give the specific nitty-gritty, pieces of power to ministers or whatnot. And under the Ontario Drinking Water Quality Standards, like the Safe Drinking Water Act, it hasn't been updated since like 2006. So PFAS isn't even listed in there. So it would seem that that's an area of focus for our province, is to get up to speed on PFAS. But broadly, we have a couple of private members bills, and for my American friends, private members legislation is, an individual member can table, something that is of local concern. The government may pass it and make it law. It can get adopted into government legislation. So a private member's bill is not often something that becomes law, but it is, it's sometimes. So there have been a few. There is an amendment put forward by a member to the Ontario Water Resources Act that the government would have an obligation to let communities know if there had been, discharge or escape in a community water source. That there was a bill brought forward, actually Bill 166, the Great Lakes Protection Amendment Act, and I think on the line MPP Barrett is on the call, but this was his private member's bill, and it I'm going to sum it up: promotion of tourism, other economic activities in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin with respect to ecological health of the basin, with a number of specifics outlined. He's a longtime member, of course, of this legislative caucus. There have been some other fine-tuning things that are, again, very specific and not sure what their consequences will be. The government has given the Minister of, they keep changing the ministry names, Conservation and Parks, Environment, Conservation and Parks, given the Minister power to make regulations about management of impacts on fish, wildlife, and other natural resources, impacts based on or resulting from construction, dam impacts, production of electricity, things like that. So flagging that as something to watch to see how that will be utilized. Anyway, so these are, again, some specifics. The Paris Gulf Moraine Conservation Act, another private member's bill, again, highlighting some of the longstanding obligations and sort of prioritizing that for the government. And there has been a little bit of legislation during COVID-19, some pieces of the Great Lakes Protection Act and the Lake Simcoe Protection Act, pieces that have been repealed. Frankly, I can't speak to what was accomplished with that, but again, there have been a few things for us to watch. Maybe I can do my homework. I've made a note to do just that. The government made a funding announcement in July for the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, investing in farmers to help farmers improve environmental sustainability, water quality, with a number of different helps, I guess, for them, ways for them to, it's a regionally targeted funding. So a number of, I think it's connected to the Lake Erie Agricultural Demonstrating Sustainability or LEADS initiative, which is supporting farmers, which actually reminds me of what we had seen when we were all together in person out visiting one of the demonstration farms there. So some things continue. One of the things that I will flag, the high lake levels, shoreline erosion, I've mentioned this on some of our other calls. Certainly, Great Lakes members of provincial parliament are hearing it from their communities in terms of the erosion, high lake levels, flooding, what that looks like. I think, for me to call it the debate of, government control, the International Joint Commission, responsibilities, all of that, fault, blame, a lot of that is really, there's a lot going on that front. As a member for Oshawa, we have a community whose properties are basically falling into the lake, and they are desperate to find a solution. So that is something that I know that this group has talked about before, but it is something that I I would find it helpful if we could sort of target on that front. And I don't know, I'd like to know what other folks are doing. And pretty much that's it for me.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you very much. Appreciate that. You got a lot going on for sure. Pennsylvania, Representative Sonny.
Now can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, great presentation. You know, I was a little bit surprised at hearing how much was identified in Michigan. I guess I didn't realize myself, you know, how prevalent these different compounds were within the manufacturing sector as a whole. And so that was very educational. You know, we've been dealing with PFAS in Pennsylvania, but very specific to one area of a military base that has been closed down. And of course, that was more than anything because of the firefighter foam. So, you know, obviously, I'm going to go back to the Capitol and do a little bit of research and work on water testing on our municipal water systems. Obviously, that is the place to start to really identify just how large of a problem it probably is. You know, we still continue in Pennsylvania to work a lot through grant programs, especially dealing with our watershed issues. We concentrate a lot on riparian and buffer zones, and our DEP really concentrates on trying to get people to plant vegetation, not destroy vegetation, to build up those stream banks and continue to get that protection, to keep those source points out from the lake. We continue to hear all the time, at least I do. And remember, again, in Pennsylvania, you know, it's just a small footprint on the lake. And all of us that live within that footprint, we cherish it so much. But the rest of Pennsylvania is so far removed, unless they come to Lake Erie and come to the city of Erie, quite frankly, to the peninsula, they don't have a clue. They really, really don't. They are always amazed when people come here and see this beautiful lake and what we have here. And so, you know, it's one of the struggles a little bit for those of us that live here. But, you know, we're going to continue through grant programs for now to try to do everything we can to keep our water as clean as possible and to continue to really focus on those sediments that are getting into the water from the surface. But we also know that now with the PFAS that, you know, we do have a number of other areas that we really need to start concentrating on. I can tell you that just this morning, I was with my neighbors across the street who lives on the bank of Lake Erie, trying to help her shore up her lake bank. You know, there's not too many things that you can do. It's usually surface water, actually. Actually, it's below the surface, but it's not the action of the high lake water that's deteriorating the banks. It's the water that is seeping out of the bank, you know, that eventually just will take out another whole section. And it has been worse than ever for all of my neighbors that are living on the lake bank. And believe me, I hear about this just about every day. And so, you know, I was lending a hand this morning, seeing if we can, you know, help this one try to shore up hers, and hopefully it works. I'll let you know next year if it works. But, but you know, as with all of you, this COVID has just, you know, changed all of our governing and focus for the most part, and it's still going to continue to do so for a time period yet to come. And then I really look forward to getting back to be able to work on a lot of these issues. I'm, as all of us, disappointed that we couldn't all gather together this year and hear the presentations. And I know that I've personally missed a lot of the presentations as they've been presented live, because we have been in session, you know, almost continually in Pennsylvania throughout this. And so, you know, there's not a lot new to report from Pennsylvania, other than the fact that you know, we're going to continue to work on the issues.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it. And I can relate to your comments about having just a small piece of the state of Indiana being on actually on Lake Michigan. And it's part of the issue is spreading the word to the rest of our state, how important it is, you know, the great significant role that Lake Michigan plays in our economic picture in the state of Indiana. It's truly amazing. So thank you for your presentation, and we'll move on to Quebec. And I understand that M&A Bélanger won't be able to make a presentation. Lisa, did he give you information?
Yes, he's going to send me his written update, and I'll share that with the members.
Very good. All right, we'll move on to Wisconsin. Representative Myers.
I managed to unmute my button all by myself. It's amazing. Like 100 Zooms and we've got it figured out. Well, welcome everyone. I'm up here. My background is literally the shores of Lake Superior, where it is absolutely beautiful right now. I wish you could all be here, except for the increase of the number of COVID cases we are facing in Wisconsin. The last I heard, we had 28 new cases, 2,800 new cases yesterday. So we are working to contain the pandemic here. A brief update. Governor Evers declared 2019 the year of clean drinking water, and we continue to work towards that goal. The Assembly Speaker convened a task force this year to address the following issues: best practices for soil management, mapping and data collection, determining sources of contaminants, assessing runoff management, investing remedies for healthy water supply, and addressing and containing wells and septic systems. We also passed a bill this last year for wetland mitigation, and I'm happy to say that was done up in my district at the northern part of the state of Wisconsin. It's a pilot program to address wetland preservation. In the last 5 years or so, we've had 2 major weather systems come through, flooding situations, and we have lost some of our wetlands because of that. We also know that making sure the wetlands are protected will help with reducing the damage that floods cause. Other than that, the state assembly and the entire legislature is not in session in Wisconsin right now. There are 99 members of the assembly and 33 members of the Senate. All 99 members of the assembly are up for re-election and half of the senators are. So you can imagine what we're doing right now. We're all running our campaigns and working hard to represent the citizens of this state. I wish you all the very best. Stay healthy. It's been a pleasure to work with you, and take care.
Thank you, Beth. I appreciate the report. We're going to loop back now to Michigan. I saw Kurt was on the hotline while the other presentations were made. So Kurt, would you like the floor for a bit?
You bet. Thank you very much. And I apologize for that, but that's what happens when you have a late night and in the office, and then you decide you want to get home and you leave it on the desk. But anyways, real quickly, you know, I just, again, Liesl Director Clark has done a phenomenal job in what we've done with PFAS. And as most of you know, we've worked very hard with that. But the other piece that Michigan has worked very hard on is lead pipe removal from residential homes. And we have put a standard together in the state with a goal to have all lead pipes removed from water main to home to the basement within the next 29 years. And that has not come without some controversy because of the cost. But we have set up grant dollars that cities and townships can apply for to help them with that assistance. But lead pipe removal, after what we've gone through in Flint, has become a top priority here in the state. And we continue to pour millions of dollars in to make sure that our citizens are safe. So, you know, as we move forward, you know, the Filter First program and the lead pipe removal is, you know, coupled along with the $80 million that we just put in for PFAS removal, or figuring out how we do more testing and how we continue to experiment to remove it. But, you know, touching base on what Liesl said, when it comes to the PFAS issue, we've done a lot of public work, and they're finding sites, you know, hunters and public land where people have dumped large amounts of contamination, and we've removed that. So with that, that's a lot where we are in the state. I'm sure there's some questions on the lead pipe removal. I'm willing to answer any of those if anybody has some. If not, we can get the policy to Lisa, and she can actually send it out to each and every one of you.
Awesome. Okay, Kurt, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And before we wrap up, I think Lisa has a few comments, but before I let her take the mic again, I want to thank Director Clark for the presentation that she made. I think it's incredible. The issue seems to be pretty pervasive, and we all need a lot of education on this topic before we move forward. And I think it's great that Lisa has already started putting together a two-part workshop, whatever we want to refer to it as a follow-up to the whole PFAS issue. And the information that she gave me was that there was going to be limited space for this. So I right now am verbally reserving my space for that two-part series. So with that, and I don't want to, never want to forget as we go through these things, thanking our sponsors that have been so kind and generous to us, and the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation and the Joyce Foundation. And without them, we wouldn't be able to do the many things that we're doing. So I think with that, I will ask Lisa for some closing comments.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, I just wanted to announce this is the third one. Next week is the fourth one. So we'll be done with the 2020 annual meeting program a week from today. Please join us. We're going to have 3 presentations from Great Lakes partner organizations. You can see the agenda in the briefing book, which we'll share that chapter on Monday. And the GLLC business is going to be especially important because we've got the election of officers and executive committee members. The slate of candidates is currently in the briefing book, if you'd like to take a look. We also have resolutions. I think Representative Schultz mentioned that. There are 7 resolutions that caucus members have submitted. Those are in your briefing books, and I also emailed them this morning to members of the caucus. And then, of course, we'll hear the invitation for the 2021 annual meeting. Because of the amount of business that we have to cover next week, that meeting will last for 90 minutes, so please plan ahead. And then also, I'd really appreciate it if you'd fill out the evaluation form for this meeting. John posted the link in the chat. One of the questions for legislators only is whether you'd be interested in participating in that 2-part workshop that Senator Charbonneau discussed. And I shared a little bit of information on that today in my GLLC member update. So please take a moment to fill out the very short evaluation and let us know if you're definitely interested in being one of the participants in the workshop. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Senator.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. And as I was going through the thank yous, I can't forget to thank Lisa and her staff that keep us on track, keep us focused, and keep us organized in a manner that we can get things done in a pretty timely fashion at these meetings. So thank you everyone for taking part today. Hopefully I'll see you next Friday, same time, same station. And until then, be safe and sane and healthy, and be careful out there. Thank you.